So JJ Redick has sat down with the commissioner Adam Silver, and shout out to JJ, man. I see him making big moves, getting meetings with the commissioner. But Adam Silver gave a lot of insight on some of the priorities of the league, them focusing on the game itself and not allowing the entertainment portion of the game to kind of affect the competition. And he also spoke about the NBA's mergence with Twitter back in, I believe, 2015. No, it was actually in 2013, but that merge with Twitter actually allowed the league to kind of get in real time feedback from the NBA audience on what's working, what actually gets a reaction, what gets people talking about the league. But I'm not going to say no more. You guys check it out, and every once in a while, I'll check in.
Right now, the biggest issue the league is confronting is the expiration of our media deal. To be careful of, let's say we're going through a collective bargaining cycle, and we just did, I can't stop everything else and spend all my time on that because obviously the business has to move forward. Right now, the biggest issue the league is confronting is the expiration of our media deals. So that should and is my highest priority, but things have a way of just happening on our calendar. To me, it's to grow the game of basketball. I mean, one of the benefits to being on the top of the pyramid of the global game is that virtually everything that happens around the game in a positive way accrues essentially or over time to the NBA's benefit. To the extent that more kids, boys and girls, whether it's through the NBA or the WNBA, become interested in our league, play the game of basketball, play basketball video games, engage in social media around the game. All that to me is largely positive for the game. I mean, you and I could go on. There's some bad aspects of that, of course.
You speaking on the competition for the young children's eyeballs. The league right now, especially among, I would say, children under the age of, I would say 15 to about 9, 8, 7 years old, the league has a lot of stiff competition from trying to gain that audience's attention span. And Ja Morant, that's the importance of him, is that he somehow, with his charisma and just his play on the court, he attracts that demographic. So that's why he's very important to the NBA, and just him acting up is such a blow to the league. But Ja Morant himself is the NBA's direct access to that audience. But like Silver was saying, there are positives with them interacting with the video games and other things like social media around the game, but there are drawbacks because those mediums at the same time, they do impose as competition for the league in order to gain that attention span of those children.
And I have to remind myself, and I like the way you put the question because I've lost my focus along the way as well. And we should talk a little bit about that. Sort of my theme for this season is back to basketball in some ways, that the game is at the core of everything we do. And to me, having that discipline to be thinking every morning that as I look out at my day, what am I doing that's focused on the game itself, improving interest in the game, improving the quality of play. There's all these wonderful things that have happened around the business and outside the business, but it's including the massive interest in social media with our players and everything about basketball. But I often have to remind myself that all stems from the quality of play on the floor, the quality of the competition.
Now, like Silver said, the growing theme of this season is back to basketball. Ironically, we do have to factor in this happens to come into play because they are in the midst of negotiations for a brand new TV deal. Also, TV partners like ESPN and TNT have put a lot of pressure on the league for guys missing out on these nationally televised games. That's where the rest policy comes into play. And ironically enough, in the beginning of this very season, we've seen those dynamics kind of play out in real time. When ESPN had Woj tweet out what's going on with a TNT broadcast with James Harden not playing for the 76ers. I mean, come on. At the same time, just think about it. Why is ESPN so concerned about a TNT broadcast? It's almost like we're seeing both of these competitors almost collaborate to make sure that the league enforces their policies where their stars show up to their games. So Adam Silver right now has a lot of different things coming his direction. A lot of proxy wars are going on. Once again, that James Harden situation, it was a little bit more than just him not playing for the 76ers and just his ongoing battles directly with that team. Once again, ESPN did a whole segment and a whole article, and they had their biggest TV analyst Woj tweet out that they had asked the NBA what's going on with a TNT broadcast that James Harden is not playing. And this low-key kind of went under the radar. Adam Silver has a lot of things coming at his desk, but that is definitely a Cold War move as the NBA is about to approach the negotiation table this spring with Turner Sports and ESPN. But Silver also spoke about the mergence with Twitter back in 2013 and how the league almost uses Twitter to see the NBA's audience reaction to certain things in real time. What players do they react to? What storylines? And sometimes this even shapes their policy around the game itself.
And even to the extent it's a meme or it's a theme on social media, I find that we need to enter the conversation. In some cases, if it's factually wrong, to do our best we can to correct the record. In some cases, to try as best we can to guide the conversation. And in other instances, to react to the conversation. And to your point, I mean, NBA Twitter is real. I mean, it's a humongous audience of people. In fact, Twitter or X told us recently, I mean, sports is the #1 category of content on that service. I think people might think it's politics or fashion or something else, but it's actually sports. And it really, not just the NBA, of course, but drives that platform, as is the case for Instagram and a lot of the other social media platforms. But it's part of, I think, my job to see if we can harness it to our advantage, because there's also enormous amount of negativity out there. I think that, and I also see as my job both to provide some, I would say, guardrails for players, entering social media, but also to be protective to the extent we can as well, because it's, as you know, I mean, our players are in many cases sort of young folks who are sensitive. And as you, of course, well know, for any fan who thinks that's not the case, they're just off, that. And I'm always sort of, as an outsider to most locker rooms, amazed when I hear that guys are actually looking at their phones at halftime. I'm like, because I don't even, there are things that I do that I find that it's incredibly distracting, even during the draft. If I'm on social media and somebody's making fun of me or laughing about the way I pronounce the name, I'm like, I find that incredibly distracting. I'm like, don't show it to me. I'll read it later. But I pay attention to it. I think it's my job to pay attention to it.
The NBA just measuring certain reactions in real time with Twitter, it kind of reminds me of how the Netflix in a way does this, because you can look at the Jeffrey Dahmer documentary on Netflix. It kind of went viral online. And I've seen the power of this in my own experience. I've seen my own girlfriend be influenced to watch that whole Jeffrey Dahmer series just off of social media, even though I told her about it months ahead. So Netflix does utilize the power of social media, and I wouldn't be surprised if they pay certain influencers to make memes or just make funny skits on some of these shows. And that's how these things tend to get watched. We've seen it play out during the pandemic with the Tiger King kind of documentary series that went viral online. And a lot of people were influenced to watch the show who normally would even never checked it out. But Adam Silver right here is confirming that the league definitely does take a look at NBA Twitter and what the fans are reacting to. And it's almost like they're getting feedback in real time to see how things are working. Take the in-season tournament, for example. Just seeing the impressions and reactions, the colors on the court, how the fans react to it. These are all things that could be tested in real time.
Well, one of the reasons I bring this up, and in some ways, I do think X or NBA Twitter or whatever, in some ways, and I don't know the actual statistics, you may know this about the participants around NBA discourse. How many people watch games, how many people are streaming games, how many people are listening to podcasts, how many people are participating on NBA Twitter. I don't know this, but in some ways, NBA Twitter is a good customer service survey. You're getting feedback, and ultimately, I think I would assume you're then making decisions or trying to make decisions around that feedback. How much did the discourse around load management influence the decisions made and the new policies in place around resting players, end of season awards, all of those things?
So my quick answer is it had a huge influence on me and on the league. I would just say, in terms of social media specifically, and I think this is the challenge for anyone who's overseeing a business or a brand that has a large audience, is to try to separate sort of what the majority view is, or what are the trends and the themes that you should follow, as opposed to what are the extremes. I mean, and I follow politics closely just as my personal interest. And I sometimes think about the way political discourse goes on social media, and it's pretty apparent it represents the extremes in most cases. And I think, again, back to the NBA, I find that I have to be careful in the same way that I don't want to necessarily let my schedule be dictated by the last email I got, that there may be a particular meme or thread on social media, but that it's impacting me disproportionately because it's not necessarily representative of our fans. Now, back to your specific question, I wouldn't just look to social media. In terms of player participation, the data is really clear. I mean, whether it's secondary market for ticket sales, a real-time market in terms of value, whether it's minute-by-minute ratings for games, whether it's streaming data. I mean, it's self-evident, but to the extent a star is not on the floor, and certainly when a star announces or a team announces before the game that star is not playing, that has a big impact on the interest. And I think also, back to an earlier point where I think that, I and the league lost its focus a bit, is that, we went down that road of so-called load management. There, of course, is some legitimacy to it. But again, that may be self-evident to a certain extent as well.
But again, they also, in real time, they got the feedback of the load management from the fans. The interest completely dropped off. And I'm pretty sure that they have analytics on it based off of the impressions and reactions on Twitter.
In terms of performance, and I separate two issues when it comes to load management. There's load management that supposedly can help prevent injuries, and then there's load management that's purely a performance issue. And again, you can speak far better about the impact of a back-to-back or 4 games out of 5 nights or anything than I can on your body. But I think, again, that's fairly intuitive even for weekend athletes, that if you're tired, you're not going to perform at as high a level. I think where, Joe Dumars has been speaking to this lately, where we're now starting to really push back hard on some of the data that where the suggestion was that you could prevent injuries from it. I think that the data is very inconclusive there. And, I've read some of the commentary, again, back to social media, like, they've discovered a religion, they're going into new media negotiations or whatever else. Frankly, we still have 2 years left on our existing.
Once again, Adam Silver, he is confirming that they're looking at the feedback from the fans in real time. The league must have not liked the overall narrative of just back-to-back games are a waste of time, players are not putting in effort. It's just certain narratives that they seen kind of form in real time. Well, guys don't give efforts, the beginning of the season doesn't matter, the regular season doesn't matter. They could see all these threads in real time and see the overall sentiment that the fans are kind of having towards the game. See, the same way a meme goes viral and it kind of promotes the game, that's the positive side. But also the negative side is people online just saying, oh, it's the regular season. The players say it don't matter, so it doesn't matter. See, those negative comments, they spread around like wildfire. The same way the meme, which is funny and has a bunch of positive impressions, the same way that spreads around and it's a positive reaction, it applies the same way in the inverse with the overall negative narratives. And that particularly surrounds the regular season not being important.
We're paying attention every day. I think that this is an area where you needed multiple years of data, and the trend lines were going in the wrong direction. Guys increasingly were playing fewer games and fewer minutes. And frankly, you don't need a super sophisticated analysis to see that it wasn't reducing injuries. I mean, there's also, this is more anecdotal, but there's a school of thought too that, particularly from some of the more veteran players or some of the retired players, that it could even lead to injuries, that if you get out of your rhythm, days off.
We've had a number of older players talk about that on the podcast.
And again, it's not, I think here where you then have to factor in the direct impact it has on the business. And this is a business. And whether it's the economics of ticket sales or ratings and fan interest in the game, or frankly, just frustration from fans. I get it. I'm a fan, and also I go to back to traveling around in my schedule. I go to lots of games. I sit in the stands, just talk to a lot of people, or just anecdotally as I travel around, people just grabbing me. The player participation policy, the load management term has become so negative around the league that they're, definitely influenced by the discourse out there, and a recognition, incidentally, again, I haven't seen this as sort of league or team versus player. I think that, to the credit of the Players Association, and particularly the vets, on the executive committee, when we sat down in collective bargaining, sure, there was some negotiation around what the right number of minimum games for, eligibility for awards, factoring in injuries and everything else. But there seemed to be complete agreement in the room that this was an issue, that this had gone too far, and that star players needed to be on the floor unless they were injured.
And it goes a little bit beyond just the star players. Younger players that just entered the league, that load management culture was so infectious. You got young guys saying, hey, when I'm going to get my load management night. That seems to be the sentiment coming in from the players that are freshly into the league the last, I would say, about 6 to 8 years. Guys have been coming in, they're 18, 19, and they're asking for their load management night. That's when the league realized, they've pretty much lost control on this. But Adam Silver was also asked about doubling back on his comments saying that the science and data supported load management. Why the switch up this season? And also if he believes that the load management is coming from the players or the teams.
My sense was, and again, there were team representatives, largely team governors, and players in the room. And at the end of the day, I think everyone agreed it was coming from both sides. That yes, the growing training staffs, the computer programs that show he's in the red, etc., that was part of it. But also, and this was coming, I'd say, more from the veteran negotiators, that it had become a thing a bit in the league.
There's a culture around it now. It got introduced, and now that's what the younger players
from younger guys. And I think the older guys were saying, all right, we'll take some responsibility for this, but this is ridiculous that the younger guys are now saying, that this should be my designated game not to play. And I just also addressed your earlier issue. First of all, no embarrassment from me to change my mind. I mean, I think that in terms of leading an organization, sometimes I look back to a second love is politics, where that's always viewed as a negative. If a politician changes his or her mind, I view that as growth, not necessarily a flip-flop. I will say, though, that back to my earlier point, I think there is good data in terms of performance. It's pretty definitive. There's no question that a tired player is not going to perform as well as one that's had more rest. And understandably, I've had conversations with coaches like Steve Kerr, for example, even very recently, about what is the optimal schedule. How many games should we have? Is there magic behind 82 and all that? And I don't think we're at the point where the data is sufficient where we can say, yes, we would be a better, putting aside the economic sacrifice, that's real, but that we would be a better league at 72 games. It's like, I think there's a lot of noise around the data on some of those issues, and we'll continue to look at it. But yes, I think on the injury side, I think as we've seen more information, and also I just want to go back to Joe Dumars. I think he has unique credibility, I would say, around the league, that his championships as a player, his championships as a GM, as a leader of an organization.
Right there, Adam Silver, he's talking in marketing terms. He's using Joe Dumars. He's using Joe Dumars as the face of the anti-load management policy. Every time he mentions the data not supporting it, he mentions Joe Dumars. And he's using the fact that Joe Dumars played at a time when the league was considered much rougher. Guys were flying on commercial flights, and they were playing the full 82 games. So this is marketing language Silver is using to kind of crush the load management culture.
That Joe is in a position to command the kind of respect where when he's speaking directly to a team, even when he's speaking to media, and he can say, and I hear this in my head a lot that, we are an 82 game league, we have an 82 game season. Players are expected to play if they're healthy, not to roll the clock back, not to play when they're hurt. Right. I mean, he's like, and the other thing I'm learning from, our mutual friend, Coach K, that it's not just leadership, but one thing, having been around him, particularly not just from my time at Duke, where I hardly knew the guy, but from his coaching of the national team, is that the messaging and the consistency of the messaging is really important. And I think that's also where the league fell down a bit, because what I've heard directly from some of the players and even from our coaches, I'd say more in our teams, is that we in the league office, and this is what Joe has been doing and I've been trying to do as well, have to do a better job setting expectations. Because if you're not talking about it enough, and this goes back to my earlier issue about sort of back to basketball, my background at the league, before I was the deputy commissioner of the league, I ran an entity here called NBA Entertainment. It's just what it sounds. I mean, I was not focused on the game itself. I was focused on the business around the game. And I think it's easy to get caught up in all the excitement. And it's part of our DNA, not just NBA Twitter, but when you think about the culture of this league, all the things you talk about in your podcast, the fashion, the food, the cities, it's part of what creates enormous interest in this league. But it's easy to forget that all of that interest only follows
the game.
And so I'm so glad you're asking me these questions. And I think that we, the league, then have to do a better job in saying, this is what our expectation is. I recognize players and teams won't always meet that expectation, but it goes to that North Star, even as you were saying in your own life, like, what do you think about when you wake up in the morning? And again, I'm learning on the job as I go. I've been with the league for a long time, but I love being part of this league and feel this enormous obligation, again, to continue growing the game and to learn from, what's happening in society at large, but also from mistakes I feel I've made along the way.
So in the last few years, we've all seen the entertainment aspect of the game kind of has taken over a little bit. And we could see this no further than the All-Star game. Just the introductions, the selecting of team members, the halftime show. The entertainment aspect of the game has fully taken over so bad that the product suffers. And the number one product that has definitely suffered the most is the NBA All-Star game. I believe Silver is protecting the other 82 games from not going through the same type of conundrum. Because last season, I don't know if that was the worst All-Star game I've ever seen, but that whole event was about entertainment. Just the intros are way too long. The halftime show is just way too long. And then the game was just nothing but a joke. And it makes you wonder, how serious can the players participating in the game can even take it? Because it's just so much hoopla going on around the game. But since this is the inaugural season of the in-season tournament, it kind of serves as a counterpunch to the league and just their games not really being taken serious. As we've seen in real time, Adam Silver has measured the social media impressions, and they've been pretty positive for the in-season tournaments, especially with the different style of basketball courts, just the different colors. This overall rollout has been pretty impressive, especially visually to watch on television. And the league has gotten pretty much positive impressions, and the ratings were up for those Friday games. But overall, from Silver, it's great to hear that the league is actually focused on just everything being about the game and then things evolving around that. And also the league kind of paying attention to what fans want and catering towards those needs in real time, using social medias to see what things they react positively about. One thing I hope that they could take into consideration is all these replays and delays of the game. Some teams lose momentum with all this stoppage during the game. So hopefully they're measuring that stuff in real time to see the fans' reaction. And at some point, I'm pretty sure they're going to cut down on that stoppage of play, as it does affect teams. But Adam Silver, once again, he has a lot of things coming at his plate at the same time. And I believe overall, since he's been in the league, he's done a good job. He's done a good job, and he shows that he can adapt and he's willing to try new things.